one by one, it consumed them, possessed them. This is the story of the Ammons family, who were all taken over by a malevolent being. Let's dive into this case in story form. Latoya Ammons was a middle-aged woman with 3 children, 2 sons that were 7 and 9 years old, and 1 daughter that was 12 at the time. She and her kids had moved into a house with her mother, Rosa Campbell, in November 2011 in Gary, Indiana. They were looking for a fresh start. The house was quaint with 3 bedrooms, a basement, and an enclosed porch. It was built in 1926 and was later converted into a rental property. One afternoon in the middle of December 2011, the family noticed horseflies swarming the porch. They covered it in a thick layer. No other houses were being affected like this. Latoya and Rosa tried swatting them away, but they kept coming back, as if they were coming back to life. Later that night, just past 2 in the morning, Latoya heard a noise coming from outside her bedroom. It woke her up from a deep sleep, so she was startled. She blinked a few times and listened carefully. Maybe this was just in my dream, she thought. But she heard heavy footsteps climbing the basement stairs, creaking with each step. Latoya pulled back her blanket, ready to scold her children if they were running up and down the stairs. It was 2 in the morning and they had school at 8. As she was about to open her bedroom door, she heard a creaking noise that only the door leading down to the basement made. They'd better have a good excuse, Latoya said to herself. She opened the door and walked out into the hallway and peered in the direction of where the noise had been coming from. She walked towards the basement door, turned the doorknob, and slowly opened it. The basement was dark and quiet. "You down there?" But silence. She walked over to her children's bedroom to see if they were awake, but they were all asleep. She thought maybe her mother was awake, so she went over to her bedroom, but she was sleeping too. Latoya brushed it off and went back to her warm bed, thinking nothing of it. In the morning, right before the kids were about to leave for school, Latoya was making their school lunches while they were getting ready. When they came out to the kitchen, Latoya asked each of her kids if they had been up in the middle of the night, but they all told her that they were asleep the entire time. Latoya looked at them suspiciously, but ultimately believed them. A week went by without any strange occurrences until one night. Latoya shot up from her bed after hearing a loud boom coming from outside her bedroom. After a few moments, her mother, Rosa, rushed into her bedroom. "What was that?" "I don't know, but I'm gonna go check it out, Ma." Rosa could see that Latoya was a bit nervous, so she decided to assist her daughter just in case. They wandered out into the pitch-dark hallway, and Latoya flipped a switch to turn on the light, but it was still dark. "I guess the bulb's out," Latoya said, flicking the switch. They slowly walked over to where the noise had come from, in the living room, which was lit up by the moonlight. There was nothing on the floor, nothing toppled over. What could have made that noise? Latoya wondered. Just then, the floor started to creak as if someone was walking on it. But Latoya and Rosa were standing still. They darted their heads back and forth to see who was there. From the corner of her eye, Latoya saw a shadow move from the living room into the hallway as if coming towards them. But when she turned her head to look, nothing was there. "Ma, did you hear that?" Rosa had gone into the kitchen to investigate the noise, so she didn't know what Latoya was talking about. But when she told her mother, in a low voice, Rosa asked, "Do you think someone is inside this house?" They slowly and quietly searched the entire home, but they found nothing and no one. For good measure, Latoya locked the basement door and agreed to go to bed. But without telling the other, they both fell asleep with an uneasy feeling in the pit of their stomach. The next night, they encountered the same thing while the children slept. Latoya and Rosa woke up to the loud creaking of the basement door being opened. It was 3:15 in the morning. They both walked over to the basement door, but it was shut. Latoya looked at her mother with fear in her eyes. She reached for the doorknob, turned it. The basement door was still locked. Weeks went by without anything strange happening, but the family faced a tragedy, the death of a loved one outside the family. That night, Latoya and Rosa couldn't sleep. They were in mourning. Latoya's daughter had invited a friend over from school to spend the night. They both could be heard giggling in Rosa's bedroom where they would be sleeping, and the boys were in their beds reading. It was just past midnight. Latoya was in the middle of reminiscing about the good old times with her relative that just passed when she heard a shriek coming from the bedroom. Both Latoya and Rosa rushed towards it, and when they reached the doorway, they both stopped in their tracks and their eyes widened. The daughter's friend was hunched in the corner, crying and shaking with fear. Latoya's daughter was unconscious, somehow levitating a few feet above the bed, suspended in air. Latoya grabbed her mother's hand as terror flowed through her entire body, and they both began to pray. She could feel her mother's hand trembling. Just then, the daughter descended from above the bed, opened her eyes, and looked at them with confusion. Rosa went to her granddaughter's friend, who was still crying, to comfort her, and Latoya ran to her daughter. "What was that? Are you okay? Do you feel okay?" she asked. But her daughter had no idea what her mother was talking about. She didn't remember anything that just happened. A few hours later, the daughter's friend was picked up by her mother, and Latoya's children had fallen asleep, but she and Rosa couldn't sleep that night. "We need to talk to someone who knows how to deal with this sort of thing because something weird is happening," Rosa told her. I know. I'll call the church in a few hours." When she did make the call, the secretary at the church didn't believe her and even refused to listen. Frustrated, Latoya called several other churches who reacted the same way, until one official at a church just 20 minutes from the house told her that he'd be willing to come visit the house that very day and take a look. Relieved, she thanked him and waited. When the church official arrived at the house, a sudden chill took over his entire body. He went from room to room, studying the walls and the entire space within the house. Then, he sat Latoya down. "I'm afraid you may be right, Miss Ammons. There's something awful inside this house. Something that doesn't want me to be here." He advised her to clean the house from top to bottom using bleach and ammonia. Then, he told her to draw crosses on every window and door using oil. Terrified, Latoya listened. He even told her to pour oil on her children's hands and feet, then draw crosses on their foreheads. So she did. A week went by without anything happening. Both Latoya and Rosa were relieved. It was over. But they couldn't be more wrong. One cold midnight, Latoya was tossing and turning, unable to sleep. She was restless. She wrapped the blanket around herself tighter and turned over to the other side. That's when she heard it. A loud boom. She waited. Then she heard the same creaking noise coming from the hallway. When she went out to investigate what it was, her foot landed in a puddle on the floor. She turned on the light that she replaced last week and saw several puddles on the floor shaped like footprints. Latoya felt her heart beating faster. She was paralyzed. She knew they couldn't continue living like this, that she needed to contact someone for help as soon as possible. The next day, she picked up her phone and contacted her friend Mia, a clairvoyant, a person who has the ability to perceive matters beyond ordinary perception. Latoya asked if she could visit the house to figure out what was happening, and sensing Latoya's concern, she agreed to come that very day. An hour later, when Mia entered the house with another clairvoyant, Jackie, she sensed the same eerie chill in the air. "It's cold in here," Mia said. Latoya said that she was used to it and offered both of them coffee, but they refused politely. They had work to do. Mia and Jackie went from room to room to investigate, while Latoya was sitting at the dining table picking at her fingers, a nervous habit. She picked up her coffee mug with trembling fingers and took a sip. When they entered the kitchen, Mia and Jackie sat down next to her. Mia reached out to hold Latoya's hands in hers. "I don't know how to tell you this. Say it," Latoya said flatly. "There are more spirits inside this house than I can count. I can feel them. They're not here to do any good. Latoya, this is bad." Latoya felt a chill go down her spine. Her skin felt raw to the touch, and she started to get a headache. "Well, what do I do? I can't stand this," Latoya said, on the verge of tears. "You have to move out of this house. I don't know anyone that can stand this infestation." Latoya told Mia that she couldn't just pick up and relocate her family, that money was tight. To alleviate some of the terror, Mia told her to build an altar in the basement. Both she and Jackie believed that that's where the activity was coming from. Something was down there. Latoya took her advice, and as soon as they left, she went into the closet, pulled out a folding table, and took it downstairs. With her mother's help, she covered it in a white tablecloth and put a white candle in the center of it, followed by 3 small statues: Mary, Joseph, and Jesus. Later that day, a family friend stopped by to make sure Latoya was okay. When Latoya told her what was going on, she decided to help. The 3 burned sage and sulfur throughout the entire house, finishing in the basement. They wrapped their heads in a white scarf and approached the altar while the friend spoke. "You will not fear the terror of the night, nor the arrow that flies by day, nor the pestilence that stalks in the darkness, nor the plague that destroys at midday. Both Latoya and Rosa felt a mild sense of calm afterwards. They thanked the friend for the tremendous help, who wished them the best when she left. 3 days passed without anything out of the ordinary happening. Latoya was relieved, but her guard was still up. And that's when it started. On the 4th day since building the altar, Latoya was in the kitchen cooking dinner when she heard whispers coming from the children's bedroom. The 2 kids were with their grandmother watching a movie. She walked over to the bedroom and noticed that it was dark inside. Then she heard her youngest son whisper, as if talking to someone else. "Who are you talking to?" Her son was sitting in the closet with a single light bulb above his head illuminating only part of the room. "This boy right here, his name is Robert." Latoya walked over to the closet and peered inside. "There's no one here, honey." "Yes, there is. He's right here," her son said with frustration. Latoya ignored this and told him to wash up for dinner. She could feel the terror coming back. In the middle of dinner, unable to shake the feeling, Latoya asked her son what he was talking to Robert about. "He was telling me what it felt like to be killed. He said it was kind of nice," her son said nonchalantly. At that moment, Latoya, her other kids, and Rosa froze. Her 12-year-old daughter scolded her little brother to not talk that way, but he insisted that he wasn't lying. Latoya and Rosa didn't continue the conversation out of fear and then cleaned up after dinner. After finishing the movie, Latoya told her children to get ready for bed. It was late. Her youngest son got up first to go to the bathroom. She walked over to the bigger couch, and before she could sit down, she witnessed her son being thrown out of the bathroom by invisible hands. His back hit the wall and then he fell to the floor. Her other children backed away quickly in fear. Latoya ran to him to make sure that he was okay. They both were in shock. She tried to comfort him as best she could, but the look in her son's eyes made her heart ache. After comforting her son and tucking him in, she went back into the kitchen when she heard a loud thud, followed by her daughter's screams. She rushed into her kid's bedroom to see her daughter's head bleeding. "What happened?" she asked. Her eldest son, who was frightened and in tears, told her that the headboard moved in such a way that it hit his sister's head on its own. Latoya turned her head to look at her daughter, but her blood ran ice cold. Her daughter's face showed an odd grin. Her eyes began to twitch violently, and then all of a sudden it stopped. Her face went back to normal as if nothing happened. She took her daughter to get stitches that night. As days passed, Latoya asked her kids several times if they were okay, if they were hurting, if they felt something inside the home with them. They told her no, but she didn't believe them. She feared what would happen next. Whatever was inside the home was becoming violent. The next night, there was an eerie silence that filled the entire home. Latoya's daughter woke up from a deep sleep to the sound of whispers coming from inside the bedroom. She sat up in bed and squinted to see better in the dark. She thought maybe her brothers were awake. Then she heard the whispers again. This time, they sounded as if they were coming from right next to her ear, but when she looked, nothing was there. What she heard next made her whimper with fear. The voices told her that she would never see her family again, that she wouldn't live another 20 minutes. At that same moment, Latoya was experiencing something sinister in her own room. Her eyes whipped open. She woke up to her body moving uncontrollably. She had no control over it at all. She began to feel lightheaded and felt herself burning up. And in that moment, she knew that it had come for her too. The entire family began fearing the night. They didn't know when they'd be attacked next. But Rosa was the only one left untouched. She claimed that it was because she had a guardian watching over her. The circumstances became so bad that the family had to sleep at a hotel just to get away from whatever was going on inside that home. Out of desperation, Latoya called the family doctor to get help a few days after what happened to her. She told Dr. Jeffrey Anyukio everything that happened to her and her family. His first thought was that she was being delusional, but he agreed to see the family at his practice. When they arrived the next day, he could tell that they were all unwell. He started performing a routine checkup. Using a flashlight to test the oldest son's pupils, he started to scream at the top of his lungs. The voice that came out of his mouth was unnatural and angry. He was speaking in tongues. And just then, her youngest son was lifted off of the ground by an invisible force and then flung against the wall before he landed on the floor unconscious. Latoya ran over to him, cradled him in her arms, and rocked back and forth crying, asking him to wake up. A nurse that was sitting in the nurse's station heard the commotion and ran into the room and caught sight of what just happened. Dr. Jeffrey, who was confused and terrified, told her to call 911. When he turned back to look at the oldest son, he was back to normal. He was asking why he was at the doctor's office when he suddenly passed out. The doctor had no idea what he stumbled onto, and both Latoya's sons were rushed to a hospital nearby. After a couple hours, the sons woke up in their hospital room, and Latoya rushed to be at their side. Her oldest son was speaking normally, but her youngest son was eerily quiet, so she reached out to touch his arm. At that moment, he began to thrash violently in his bed, screaming as if he was in pain. It took 5 staff members to hold him down. While the family was at the hospital dealing with their nightmare, something else was looming over them, something they weren't expecting. An anonymous caller notified the Department of Child Services, claiming that there may be possible abuse and neglect going on inside the home. That's when Valerie Washington, a case manager, was assigned to investigate the family. When Latoya heard about this, she was infuriated, heartbroken. Since the strange occurrences, all she wanted to do was make it stop. Something had attached itself to her and her family, and its tight grip would not let them go. A few days later, Valerie went to the hospital to interview the family. Wanting privacy, she asked Latoya if she could interview the sons in an exam room with a nurse present. Latoya agreed, but Rosa went with them. What Valerie and the nurse witnessed afterwards was a horrifying scene. The youngest son lunged at his older brother, screaming that it was time for him to die. The oldest son, he went into a trance-like state, with his eyes rolling back into his head while he started to grin. But things got even worse. The oldest son started slowly walking backwards until his back hit the wall. Instead of stopping, he continued to walk up the wall and onto the ceiling on all 4s. He looked at the 3 adults in the room for a moment. He let go and then landed back on his feet. At this point, Valerie and the nurse were terrified, so they ran out of the room. The boys didn't remember what they just did. The days went by, and eventually Latoya was separated from her children despite what Valerie saw. On April 22, 2012, Reverend Michael Maginot, a priest in Maryville, just 20 minutes from Gary, visited Latoya and Rosa in the home to investigate what was going on. He had been notified of the strange occurrences. When he entered the home, he felt the same chill others had felt. As soon as he walked into the house, the bathroom lights began to flicker. When he approached the bathroom, they stopped. Then, the lights in the living room began to flicker, and when he approached them, they stopped. It was as if this thing was afraid of him. When he sat down to talk to Latoya and her mother, he noticed wet footprints that appeared out of nowhere, coming towards them. "Sorry, I have a headache. I'll be right back. I just need to go grab some Advil." But before Latoya could get up, the Reverend pulled out a crucifix from his jacket pocket and placed it on Latoya's forehead. And at that moment, Latoya's body started to convulse violently. What Reverend Michael believed was confirmed. The family was being tormented by something demonic, but it had attached itself to the mother and wouldn't let go. "I believe there are spirits that dwell inside this home along with the demonic presence. I advise you to leave this house. It's not safe." He blessed the house, praying and sprinkling holy water in each room, and then they all left together. Latoya and Rosa contacted a relative nearby and asked if they could stay with her, and she said yes. A week later, Latoya and her mother found themselves standing in front of the house again, with Valerie and a few police officers. The case manager wanted to check the condition of the house to see if Latoya was fit to have her children back. What they found was something sinister. When they went down to the basement, the floor underneath the stairs was covered in fresh dirt, and the cement around it looked like it was recently broken. When they took pictures inside the house, they saw eerie silhouettes in each photo. When they tried recording audio inside the house and played it back, they heard something that sounded like a low growl. When another checkup was done inside the house a few days later, police officers found residue covering the blinds, and when they wiped them, the residue came back within minutes. The Reverend pointed out that this was a sign of a demonic presence. Another caseworker was sent to the house because Valerie refused to go back. When she got there, she felt as if something had broken her finger by grabbing her hand and twisting it. Things were getting bad as each day passed. The time had come, and Reverend Michael knew exactly what he needed to do. He needed to perform an exorcism to get rid of whatever was tormenting the family. He told Latoya that he needed to use the name of whatever had attached itself to her, that knowing the name meant that he had power over it. And so it started. Reverend Michael sat Latoya down and performed his first exorcism in English. He could feel how strong whatever this thing was, and it wasn't going to give up easily. Latoya even tried to pray with him before it got too painful for her, and before it wouldn't let her. Reverend Michael performed 3 exorcisms on Latoya, 2 in English and 1 in Latin. A woman that was assisting the Reverend would write down a long name on a piece of paper. She'd put it in an envelope and surround it with blessed salt on her nightstand. If Latoya experienced any problems in her new home in Indianapolis, the woman would burn the envelope. The home had already been blessed by the Reverend before Latoya and Rosa moved in. But one night, Latoya called the Reverend, complaining about having horrible, vivid dreams. Dreams where ugly, horrifying faces were coming for her. Alarmed, he later called the woman who took the envelope from her nightstand, struck a match, and burned it over the sink, watching it turn into ash. Latoya never faced another strange occurrence after that. The final exorcism took place at the end of June in 2012, and it proved to be successful. And 6 months after her children were taken from her, Latoya was reunited with them. The house went unoccupied for a long time until a man named Zach Baggins, a paranormal investigator on Ghost Adventures, bought it in 2014. He bulldozed it 2 years later, and the symbol of evil in Gary, Indiana, was demolished. If you liked this video, please give it a thumbs up or maybe even subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.